I'm Bess Marcus, the Dean of the School of Public Health here at Brown, and we're so delighted to have all of you with us today. So thanks for being here. We're here today to celebrate the 20th annual Dr. and Mrs. Frederick Barnes Lecture in Public Health, and I'm delighted to see so many people, all of you here, and we have another room where we're broadcasting this very important day today. So, the Barnes Lecture started under the leadership of Vince Moore, who in the year 2000, way back in 2000, he at the time was the chair of the Department of Community Health, and then this lectureship continued under Dr. Fox Weddle, the prior dean of the School of Public Health, our inaugural dean, and I'm excited to continue this tradition and have it really be a centerpiece of our National Public Health Week here at Brown. So before introducing our speaker today, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Fred Barnes, who this lectureship is named for. Dr. Barnes came to Brown in 1962 to help Brown's new program in medicine. He was so excited about the prospect of developing physicians in a liberal arts setting. And he taught what became a hugely popular course called The Informative Way of Life. And many students were very inspired by this course. And one of those students, Jim Zisson, who was a 1974 graduate of Brown, endowed this lectureship in honor of Dr. Barnes. And so I'd like to acknowledge Susan Waldrop Barnes, who's here with us to celebrate this important moment. And now I'll speak about our lecturer for this 20th anniversary of this lecture. So I'm really honored to welcome and introduce the internationally known and award-winning scientist, writer, and mindfulness pioneer, Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn. One of the central themes of our School of Public Health strategic plan is about mental health, resilience, and mindfulness. And this lecture is very connected to those themes. In fact, we're learning that mindfulness can be a powerful tool in the prevention and treatment of health issues like high blood pressure, anxiety, depression, obesity, and many other areas. And we're really focusing here at Brown on the evidence-based applications of mindfulness, and you'll hear more about that later on. So Dr. Kabat-Zinn has really propelled mindfulness-based programs into the mainstream and really advocated for participatory preventive medicine, which is very connected to public health, really the core of public health. Dr. Kabat-Zinn is Professor of Medicine Emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Medical School, where he created the Stress Reduction Clinic and the Center for Mindfulness, which was in medicine, healthcare, and society. So you'll hear more from him soon, but his practice of yoga and studies with Buddhist teachers led him to integrate these findings within science, within scientific findings. And the stress reduction program that he created, called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, has become increasingly adopted as a public health intervention locally here in Providence, nationally, and in fact globally. Today it is offered both in clinical and community settings, including schools, hospitals, prisons, and corporate work environments. Dr. Kabat-Zinn is the author of numerous books, including Full Catastrophe Living, Arriving at Your Own Door, Coming to Our Senses. And the first book of Dr. Kabat-Zinn's that I read, which remains my favorite, is called Wherever You Go, There You Are. Dr. Kabat-Zinn is an advisor to our Mindfulness Center here at Brown and has been a mentor to and a major influence on many of our faculty, including our director, Eric Laux, who you'll hear from later today. I first became aware of Dr. Kabat-Zinn's work when I was a graduate student, looking at non-pharmacologic, non-medication approaches to helping people quit smoking, lose weight, and lead more meaningful lives. So it's really a great honor to have him here today as our speaker during National Public Health Week. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kabat-Zinn.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. And thank you, Susan Waldrop Barnes, for keeping the lineage going. And thank you all for coming this afternoon. And ordinarily, I don't think I would be aware that it's Public Health Week. But having been invited by the School of Public Health and seeing the sign outside the door reminded me that it is indeed public health. So I feel very in alignment, and you'll see why in a few moments, with this whole domain of inquiry around how to further our health in the public sphere, which includes the nation, the environment, our planet. So public health is a very, very big topic. And part of what I'll talk about is the fact that in 1979, 40 years ago this year, that I started the MBSR program. I conceived of it as a public health intervention in the sense that the idea was to move the bell curve of society. And if I ever get to my PowerPoint slides, you'll see the bell curve and move and stuff like that. But I don't like to be confined by PowerPoint, which, because when I create a PowerPoint presentation, I create it at some other moment. But mindfulness is all about this moment. So why should I pull you through what my thoughts were at some other moment rather than just interact here? But there are certain things that, for the image value of them, I've kept. So it will have some degree of PowerPoint presentation to it. But what I'd like mostly is for you to not think of it as a talk, but think of it as an engagement of some kind. You all showed up here. And I'm sure that every single one of you has better things to do with this beautiful sunny afternoon in early spring than to come inside and hear one more person talk, and no less from a very high platform, which of course puffs up my, sort of being enormously, that I'm up here with all the flowers and, you can start worshiping me whenever you like. But for me, that's kind of, in some sense, antithetical to why I'm here. And so what I'd like to do is invite you to sort of more have a sense that rather than coming to a talk, you're coming to some kind of exploration of why you decided to come in the first place. Because, again, none of you are here by accident. You all have better things to do. So there must be something significant that would be easily trivialized that brought you here today. And we're not going to evaluate it. We're not going to judge it. But it would be nice if we recognized it, because that recognition lies at the heart of mindfulness, is that awareness of the actuality of things, including what our motives are for showing up someplace. And since this is about mindfulness, and mindfulness is not a concept or some nice philosophy or catechism, but it is a way of being in relationship with reality and the actuality of life itself. And it is an extremely rigorous and arduous, in some sense, meditation practice. The very fact that 300 people showed up in the afternoon on a weekday for this talk is a certain kind of data, because if we'd offered this talk 40 years ago, 0 people would have shown up. So, some element of public health has to do with me. The whole idea, as you'll see, of my MBSR was to take people falling through the cracks of the healthcare system and challenging them to do something for themselves that nobody on the planet, including their physicians, surgeons, sort of religious people, their family, and so forth, can do for you. But only you can do for yourself, and there was no availability for that. It was always kind of an auto mechanics model of medicine. You drive your broken down body or mind into the clinic, and then we'll fix you. And truth be known, there are very, very few fixes or cures in medicine, even to this day. There are a few, and they're fabulous. And if you have knee problems or hip problems and you need a bionic joint, it turns out you can get one and be pain-free, and there's like amazing, miraculous things in medicine. But still, in terms of the body as a whole, there are very few cures. And we want to differentiate between curing and healing. And healing is available to us in any moment, and if I can follow enough thought strains together without losing my frame of mind or what I had in mind, I will pull those together at a certain point. Or you can remind me in the Q&A, because I would like to have this be very much an interaction, so there'll be plenty of time for questions and dialogue, and also for deep inquiry. Let's look at the whole thing as being an invitation to sort of deeply inquire, not just like why you showed up today, but in fact, who are you anyway? And what would it mean to even be healthy in a world that is, in so many ways, seriously toxic? And where we're experiencing the stress of that and the pain of that and the rending of that in ways that are as old as civilization itself and also as new as Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. So I'd like to sort of take a moment, and before I start clicking the PowerPoint, to just invite you to drop into the fact that whatever got you here, you are already arrived. You are here. So let's see if we are. Because your mind could already be thinking, well, made a mistake coming to this lecture. I thought, get me out of here. I wish I'd sat at the back, or whatever it is. And I also want to honor how many students are here. So how many students are here? Students at Brown, fantastic. How many graduate students? Just keep your hands up. How many undergraduates? Wonderful. How many graduates of an MBSR program? Wow. So, and how many teachers of MBSR? Well, welcome one and all, and if you don't fit into those categories, the only category I'm interested in, frankly, is human. So I'd like to invite you to actually, and can you all hear me at the back? Am I audible? Okay, because I don't want to shout about meditation. But I'd like to invite you to drop in to the fact that your body is sitting here on this chair. And it took a lot of energy, as we said, to get you here. You made all sorts of choices, and now here you are. So how could you actually drop in to being fully present? Well, one way you might do it, well, let me ask one more question. How many of you would call yourself regular meditators? Raise your hands. Almost everybody. So, or maybe 70% of people. So deep bow to you all for that. May it just continue ad nauseum or ad infinitum, however you like. The beauty of the present moment being that it's infinite anyway. So there's no time in the present moment. So the invitation is to actually drop into what in a certain way is the timeless quality of being, and also not being caught in the stream of time that really arises through what we call thinking. Thinking is, in some sense, a generator of time. And what mindfulness is awareness. And awareness is, in a certain way, always in the now. So if you're thinking about the past, it's thinking. If you're anticipating the future, it's thinking. But here, so can you sense your body sitting here breathing? And the answer is, of course you can. That's part of the human repertoire. But will you? Will you be willing to do this? So can you feel the breath moving in and out of your body? And then I'll ask you the question, who's feeling it? You know, we even say your body. Who is whoever it is that's saying it's my body? These are the personal pronouns. Come into this very, very rapidly. And me and we are going to be a big theme in this talk, so we'll be moving in and out of personal pronouns the whole time. But it's a non-trivial question to ask who's breathing, because if it were up to you to be breathing, you would have dropped dead a long time ago. You got some kind of text or, you know, had a thought and, you know, checked your Instagram and whoops, dead. So whoever you think you are, you're not allowed anywhere near the brainstem and the phrenic nerve and the diaphragm that is doing the work. You know why? You, that personal pronoun or what a referent is, way too unreliable to keep the breath going. You're lucky if you can even be aware of this breath. And then get so bored the next breath is like, forget about it, I'm out to lunch, which is literally and metaphorically true. So, bringing ourselves back moment by moment with huge playfulness and generosity, and seeing if we can actually inhabit this timeless moment we call now. Fully awake, fully aware, with no agenda other than to be fully awake, fully aware, which doesn't require any effort because it's biologically woven in. And then silence becomes your friend. Stillness becomes your friend. And you don't have to shut off all the thoughts in your mind. And if you're thinking at the moment, among all the other thoughts in your mind, that you're the only one that has thoughts in your mind, forget about it. Everybody is plagued by thoughts in the mind, virtually all the time. And a lot of them are very heavily freighted with emotion. And unbelievable narratives of who did what to whom and why and who's to blame and how you're certainly not you, and on and on and on. And not just about yourself, but everybody else, the whole world, and the good guys and the bad guys and who we love and who we hate and, you know, all this like ussing and theming. And can we find a way to simply rest in awareness of the whole thing without shutting any of it off? And since most of you practice on a hopefully regular basis, you'll already recognize that that's available to you 24/7 or whenever you're at least awake, that you don't have to be sitting in a particular way. To do this, you could be walking down the street or in class, or cooking dinner, or making love. Doesn't hurt to be present for that. Or being with your children or grandchildren. There's no waking moment when it wouldn't be, in some sense, richer and more dimensional, more multidimensional, if you were actually present for it. And there are many, many years of research that shows that this is not just some quaint import from Southeast Asia or East Asia or, you know, India that has a kind of catechism and belief system and everything else. This actually transforms how we are, biologically, psychologically, cognitively, emotionally, socially. Because where's the barrier of you? Are you confined to the envelope of your skin? Interesting questions to ask, aren't they? So, you know, there's a certain way in which, yes, we're the center of the universe. I am the center of the universe. And the interesting thing about this universe is that it's true, that, like, you know, we're very self-involved. and we want the best for ourselves and for the people that we're closest to and that we care about. And everybody else is like, good luck or bad news. So then we fall into what's called the narrative of me, the story of me, our favorite subject. Like a movie on the marquee, the story of me, starring, guess who? Me. And I would like to say that from a public health perspective, in 1979, when I started the stress reduction clinic, a large part of it was to get people falling through the cracks of the healthcare system to come into the hospital and see if there wasn't something they could do for themselves that nobody else could do for them, and challenge them with these very rigorous Buddhist meditative practices that were never solely Buddhist because they are virtually universal, being about attention, awareness, kindness, compassion, interconnectivity. And then just see, is it valuable or not? Because when people are falling through the cracks of the healthcare system, and probably all of us have at one point or another, it's not like it's not an epidemic. The healthcare system is like, the chancellor of Duke University wrote a paper saying the chassis is broken and the wheels are falling off, talking about American healthcare. And I'm not talking about how we pay for American healthcare. I'm not talking about Obamacare and how good that might be. I'm talking about how much care is in healthcare and how much more could be in there if we had a participatory medicine, if we had a medicine that met people in a way that gave them tools to actually optimize health across the lifespan when they're young enough to be able to actually fall in love with that way of being. And then the reward, so to speak, the payoff comes from actually what we call health. So that's public health. But in 1979, the idea was, well, you take people as individuals, you put them in classes, in fairly large classes. It's not therapy, and it's certainly not group therapy. And we train together, exercising the muscle of mindfulness. And it was to see what happens. And what happened was symptoms dropped through the floor in 8 weeks for many, many people who were given up by the medical system as basically helpless, chronic pain patients, people with all sorts of chronic conditions where there are no cures. But healing, my working definition of it is coming to terms with things as they are. That's always possible. But it requires a rotation in consciousness. So instead of just caught in the story of how bad things are for me and how it's all over and downhill from here and I'm a mess and all the things that we say to ourselves using those personal pronouns, that we actually learn to not privilege thinking when we have this whole other intelligence available to us called awareness that we never get any training in school until Hal Roth came to Brown. And if you put the balance between thought and awareness together, very often the balance is so far weighted down by thinking that it's really hard to be aware for anything but a fleeting fraction of a second before even whatever you're aware of, the object of attention, sort of carries you off in some other direction. So it does require a discipline of re-equilibrating moment by moment, and so we can attend. And physicians, how many physicians in the room? Welcome. So those of you who are not physicians may not know, but physicians who round in the hospital, who see patients in the hospital, are called attendings. Okay? There's a reason for that. So what I'd like to suggest is that here's a practice for you to do tomorrow morning, okay? This is going to be very radical. We were just dropping in, and maybe you think that I'm giving a lecture now rather than a guided meditation. Like, did that end? Or maybe we've got this meditation thing all wrong, and it's all meditation, if you're paying attention, if you're listening, if you're hearing not my words, but where my words are pointing. which you have to reach out to them so that the resonances actually go into the heart. Otherwise, they just go into the ears, and then they're metabolized through liking and disliking. Agree, don't agree, more thinking. And if that's the case, then I have failed completely in this non-talk. So here's kind of a little homework, which may sound very radical to some of you, especially if you're die-hard meditators in the sort of heavy-duty meditative traditions. And full disclosure, I am. The virtues of meditating in bed. Okay? I would like to suggest that tomorrow morning when you wake up, that you finish the job before you get out of bed. Because this is all about waking up. And we wake up every morning, but we wake up onto automatic pilot. A lot of the time it's not true that you wake up and already you're late. Oh my God, I get it. And you're out of bed. And before your feet hit the floor, you're out of your body and into your calendar. Is that true for anybody? And getting the kids, lunch and, school. And so here's the suggestion. Just when you notice that you're awake, you do this every day, so it's not like, oh, how do I do that? How do I get started? You'll be aware that at a certain moment that you're awake, even if the impulse is to jump immediately out of bed. Don't jump. Lie in bed, turn over onto your back in yoga. How many of you do yoga? Okay, it's called the corpse pose. Beautiful. The invitation is to die. Die now and get it over with. Die to the past, die to the future, and therefore show up, wake up to this moment, okay? You just woke up. Can you feel your body? So right now, stretch out a little bit, just pretending you're in bed. And I want to invite you to just see if you can imagine that you're lying in bed and you're feeling your breath moving in and out of your body, just the way I invited you to do a few minutes ago. Okay, so it's not about the breath. The breath's an object of attention. It's about the attending itself. So can you rest in the attending or surf on the waves of your own breathing with full awareness? Okay, now you're still in bed, and at a certain point, depending on how long you want to keep this up, see if you can actually put your attention in your hands. So you're going to feature your hands, both of them, if you have two hands. Center stage in the field of your awareness. After all, they're connected to the rest of you. Can you actually feel what's here to be felt in the hands? And it doesn't matter what it is. If you feel nothing but numbness or nothing, then be aware of numbness or nothing. But if there is sensation there or a universe of sensation, simply be aware of it without naming any of it or making a story about that, but just inhabiting the hands of your own body. And you're still lying in bed here. The breath, of course, doesn't stop just because you're putting your attention in your hands. So you could bring awareness to that as well. And then you could play in many different ways. It was like, for instance, could you put your attention in your feet? Take it out of your hands and direct it into your feet. And just play with that at the moment. Even 1 or 2 minutes of this before you jump out of bed can be really profound. 20 or 30 minutes by the clock of this, even though it is timeless. on a regular basis? Because we always say we don't have time to meditate, we're too busy, blah, blah, blah. But if you go to bed every night, then you're already, positioned to do it. Just set the clock back a half an hour. So instead of getting up at 7, you get up at 6:30. As an experiment and as a gift to yourself, I would venture to say. And just do that for 8 weeks and see what happens. And then the real meditation practice, just to say, so I won't keep that going, but you can play with a lot of different things. Just say the right side of your body, right hand, right foot, or the whole of this side of the body, or left hand. And, it's just, you couldn't even do this. How many of you could feel your hands? Okay. So when you put your mind in your hands, do you know how you do it? And do you know what's involved in the nervous system to do that? I mean, we have maps of the body in the brain, the somatosensory homunculus for one, but there are many, and insulin and so forth. When you attend to the hand, the reason you're doing it is because you're attending through the brain and the map of the brain. Otherwise, you wouldn't feel it at all. Sensory nerves all ascend and descend. So, you're actually experiencing the miracle of being alive and being this extremely complex organism. And we're asking about health. So you're the health of one individual. However your health is, it's a wonderful place to start. We work with people who have every conceivable condition, medical condition, and even some psychiatric condition on the planet. And where they are, when they come in, that's the perfect place to begin. And then the begin means befriend the actuality of your experience in this moment. And you don't have to have some big agenda for how it's going to rescue you, save you, heal you, cure you, enlighten you 5 years from now or 5 minutes from now. Just trust that this is the way life emerges by actually attending to it. Otherwise, and I'm sure you've had this experience, you could live 20 or 30 years and then look back and say, what happened? Who were those children? Who was I in bed with? No joke. And actually not just not know, but have no idea that you had actually choices all along the way, that you could have navigated had you been paying attention to some of the most interesting indicators of reality out there, of where suffering lies and where well-being lies. So this was like in 1979, the notion of public health is like you take care of yourself and enough people do it, the public health will change, okay? We're in a different universe now. That's kind of more like the me model, and a lot of me's maybe become we. Now we're in the kind of so interconnected. 1979 is like we were living in an analog universe, okay? Many of you are what are called digital natives. You've been born into the digital world, and even a tree is probably not as interesting as a simulation, if it's a really good simulation. I'm being slightly facetious, but humanity has gone through a major event, and we ain't seen nothing yet. And one of the major things about this is like if the public health from here on is really human health, is really the health of the species, is really the health of the planet, then we need to reconceptualize how we go from the me part of it to the we part of it without disgracing ourselves by separating self from other when you don't even know who you are in the first place. I just proved that by, it's like you're not your name, you're not your age, you're not whatever's keeping you breathing. You're not your heartbeat. Hey, if you think you're not allowed near the breath, which of course you could hold your breath, never mind the heart. I mean, you aren't allowed anywhere near that because you're just so bloody unreliable. Because you're like paying attention. You're constantly distracted. We live in the age of distraction, and distraction has now become its own economy. You know, your eyeballs are being bought and sold. If you don't believe me, read a wonderful book that just came out by a woman who was for a long time a professor at the Harvard Business School called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff, about what, you know, Google's business plan changed from just being a kind of really great search engine to having to monetize it, and now they know more about you than you know about you. Every click. And they sell it to advertisers. And there's this thing called sort of behavioral gathering. They are gathering. That's what big data is about. And, you know, there are all sorts of consequences of this. I'll follow up on that later if you remind me. But I feel like I should actually start the PowerPoint at this point. You know? And you'll see why in a moment. So, a few things about the past and MBSR, but we're really moving into the present and the challenges that we face in the present for generations yet to come, and how this is really a challenge to evolution, our evolution as a species. And my thesis will be, and this is a very important public health, in my view at least, public health commitment, so to speak, is that we don't have that much time to take care of the species we call Homo sapiens sapiens. The species that, by the way, from the Latin sapere, which means to taste or to know, we're the species that is aware and is aware that it's aware. It's not cognition and metacognition, it's awareness and meta-awareness. And we have not fully lived our way into it. And I'm going to say that in the interest of health, in the interest of public health, in the interest of planetary health, that we as a species need to find our way into the name Linnaeus gave us as a species before certain kinds of trends that are already unfolding are going to make it much, much more difficult for us to actually be awake or woke, or whatever way you want to frame it, to wake up to the actuality and the reality of life, where we tell ourselves narratives that even if they're true, and most of them are not true, they're not true enough. And they're also dehumanizing because they're doing this othering all the time. So, that said, I want to dedicate this talk to my friend, and how many of you recognize this name, Ferris Urbanowski, Buck Urbanowski? So she was my friend for many, many years, going back to the early 70s, so almost 40, 50 years. And she was a great MBSR teacher, and she died recently. This is Ferris. And this is Mark Williams, John Teasdale, myself, and Zindel Siegel. So they are, if you know anything about mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, these are the founders of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. And of course, they didn't know much about mindfulness while they were learning about mindfulness-based cognitive therapy or developing it. They didn't, and they learned an enormous amount from Ferris, caring for them and taking care of them and mentoring them and training their students and so forth. And this was taken in Orangeville, Ontario in 1999. So just a moment for me and whoever knew her to just recognize that, as with all of us here, it ain't permanent, okay? The only certainty is change. And so to just honor that, and that's why I wasn't actually joking when I said in the corpse posture, die and get it over with. Die to your attachment to your story, to you know, who you think you are, and therefore be born into the larger dimensionality of who you actually are. So you could say that's a me agenda, but it's also a we agenda because we be, in the language of Thich Nhat Hanh. The first thing you are aware of when you really penetrate into the present moment with mindfulness is that there's no separation. Everything's connected to everything else. Quantum physicists know this, cosmologists know this. I mean, the universe is constructed that way, but we don't pay that much attention to these kinds of things. And I'm saying there's a certain degree of compelling urgency for us as humans to learn that, so that it's like, it's already in our DNA, but it becomes our default mode as opposed to mindlessness being the default mode. Okay, so from the very beginning, I always thought of MBSR, as I said, as being a public health intervention. Having no credentials to teach people anything within medicine or to treat anybody, having been trained as a molecular biologist, but having just fallen in love with these meditative practices and yoga, the idea was to actually, as I said, catch people falling through the cracks of the healthcare system as a kind of educational clinic and teach them something as a complement to whatever healthcare could do for them. And I was inspired by the 1979 Surgeon General's report called Healthy People, which was like an incredibly important and avant-garde kind of articulation of the challenge of things at this moment. And I'll just read a little bit of it. This report's central theme is that the health of this nation's citizens can be significantly improved through actions individuals can take themselves. So that's the me part. And in 1979, there was no we part. I mean, it was all about help people be healthier, run, do whatever, take your high blood pressure medication. But there was not that much social recognition that there's a we element to it. And then it's also said, which I thought gave me license to just go for it, since stressful events are not always preventable, preparation for dealing with them has to begin early. Emphasis should be given to building coping skills in children and young people, of course. Too often, stress has been addressed only after the problem is developed. That's what hospitals are for. By treatment of the alcoholic, the languaging, of course, is like 50 years old, so it's like you can feel how it's like a little off. Of the alcoholic, the drug abuser. Can you feel how disempowering that is? You're naming and, in a certain way, blaming people for being caught in something. The alcoholic, the drug abuser, the acutely depressed person. The acutely depressed person is also a person. And by penalties for criminal offenders. Much more attention should be given to preparing people to deal in less destructive ways with unavoidable stressors. And they're like, okay, we'll just do it at the medical school, at the medical center. And then we'll keep track of it, because I was trained as a scientist, you've got to record, keep track of what the, outcomes are. And then see. But my thought from the very beginning, my realization from the very beginning was, if this can be proved in one environment, if we can see in one environment this benefits people who are indeed with all sorts of chronic conditions, including lots of chronic pain, falling through the cracks of the healthcare system, and they can in 8 weeks do something for themselves, that often they'll go back to their doctors and say, I got more out of that 8-week program than I got out of 8 years working with you. And it's not a criticism of the doctor, it's like a recognition that there's a power within me that I didn't even realize. That's what I mean by healing. And it doesn't mean your cancer will magically be meditated away. Well, even your blood pressure will naturally go down, although it could. But there's no telling. But when you move into that, you get these kinds of benefits and many, many more that are much harder to articulate, but that have to do with embodiment. Have to do with living the life that's yours to live and being in deep connection with what's most meaningful to you. So that was so inspiring to me. And I thought, if we have large classes, not small classes, but 30, 40 medical patients at a time, and have 5 or 6 or 8 classes going, as we did in the heyday of it, for years and years and years, you're beginning to actually have a population effect on people. Yes, people are getting their individual benefits, but you're actually moving the bell. So this is our 40th year. And now it did actually escape from the UMass Medical Center, and it has moved around the world. And from the perspective of 1979, if you had said that the National Institutes of Health would be funding scores of millions of dollars of research a year on Buddhist meditation practices within mainstream medicine, somebody would have put you in a psychiatric institute as like, that is more improbable than that the Big Bang that started the universe would all of a sudden, the expanding universe would come to a grinding halt and collapse back onto itself. That was more probable than that the NIH would do this, and the NIH did it. Okay? And is continuing to do it. And the beauty of this in some way is that the science, although it's not all top-notch science, so much of it is. And so many young scientists are doing this on the clinical side, on the neuroscience side. It's staggering, it's beautiful. And they came to meditation before they came to medicine or neuroscience. There's a whole new generation of folks. Maybe some of you are in the audience that way. And so if you don't know the word Dharma, you can kind of read about it in various ways. But it is a confluence, MBSR is a confluence of universes that never talk to each other. The universe of what's called Dharma, or deep meditative wisdom practices in all traditions. And what's deepest and best about medicine and science when it's at its best. And believe me, there's a shadow side to medicine. The Nazis, the American quote-unquote Indian health service, I mean, the atrocities that have been done in the name of medicine and sometimes in the name of science, they don't get a clean bill of health either. But I'm speaking of the higher reaches of this, that if we can actually mobilize them, there is something transformative here that has never happened before on the planet. Never happened before on the planet. And it's not about the Dalai Lama or Thich Nhat Hanh or Mother Teresa or your hero or saint of the moment. It's about we, us, humans. And it's not about the Buddha, who, for all intents and purposes, wasn't actually a Buddhist. And so none of these meditation practices are invitations to change your religion or your belief system or anything. It's fall into awareness, wake up. Then what you're waking up to in their language would be your true nature, or they might say your Buddha nature. And why not wake up to your true nature before you die? Why wait until like the last minute? And Thoreau, was famous for having said in Walden, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front, meaning confront, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what they had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. So that's what I mean by die now. Get it over with, because why wait? The potential is that, like, finally we'll be not ready to die, but we'll be about to die, and then we'll realize, holy cow, I got the whole bloody thing wrong. I was a mean SOB to my children, and I was like so self-centered, and I didn't recognize suffering in anybody else, and I was like, just, and then you die. No. Face it now. Why not? And then, but not the story of how mean you were or anything else. Just a recognition that there's so much more to you than even your meanness or your ignorance or whatever it is that you're blaming yourself for. And maybe take a no-blame orientation whatsoever, a non-dual orientation. That, maybe you're good enough for now. And then, like, if you inhabit now, then maybe that good enough can simply be good. I mean, really good. I mean, beautiful. And in that sense, the meditation practice and what you'll be doing in bed tomorrow morning, this is not one more thing you have to squeeze into your already too busy day. This is a love affair. This is a love affair with what it means to be truly human. at a time when there's a significant urgency to take care of the world with a public health orientation in the largest definition or framework of that for the sake of the future of all beings, and not just human beings, but, you know, the plant world, the animal world, the creatures that we don't even know we are completely interdependent on. And then so we eradicate species that actually may be incredibly important to us because of that realization of interconnectedness that science is supporting in incredible ways. So let me just say a word or two about science, and this is why I did the PowerPoint at all. It's for this one slide. So if you don't remember anything else, just look at this, okay? This is the first paper to come out of the stress reduction clinic. There's a 1 here. You can't even see the blue because it's just 1 in 1982. Our first paper on MBSR and its outcomes for people with chronic pain, okay? And over time, you'll see for decades, really 2 decades, sub-threshold, almost nothing going on, kind of like the catacombs, you know, it's kind of a few people here and there, a few things in the medical literature. And then all of a sudden, around 1998, in 2000, 2003, it starts to go up, and it is going exponential. Hundreds, 840, I just got this data from David Black. We developed this slide together many years ago. 842 peer-reviewed papers in the medical and scientific literature with mindfulness in the title. Okay? Now, are they all great science? No. If I want to be really rigorous about it, I would say that at least 10% of them are great science. Okay? And 10% is already not insignificant, and probably it's more like 40 or 50%. So this is a phenomenon, and it's gone from nothing to a field where people, if young people in the old days went to their neuroscientist thesis advisor and said, hey, you know what I want to do my thesis on? I want to do my thesis on mindfulness and effects on the brain. They would laugh at you and say, you know, that's the stupidest, most career-ending move I've ever heard a graduate student say. And now it's like, it's a no-brainer. Of course, everybody wants to do that. And then you see you have 2 laboratories. You have the scanner, and then you got this. This is a laboratory. You get to investigate the nature of you. Non-trivial. Are you with me? You getting this? Okay. So now this, can we dim the lights, actually? Is that even humanly possible? Because I'd like to show you like a 3-minute clip from the Healing in the Mind. It was a PBS television special in 1993. So 14 years into the stress reduction clinic, Bill Moyers came. And does anybody know how to do that? Nobody knows. This is a university. Look, I was at MIT. I've seen it in action, you know. They couldn't even make a slide projector work in the old days. So can you see it enough? Okay, and hopefully the sound will be loud enough. So this is a class that they filmed, 8 weeks. You know, you come to a class for 2.5 or 3 hours a week. It's like 30, 40 people in the room, all referred by their doctors for one thing or another. And Bill Moyers was in there with 3 cameras and a whole sound crew, you know, it's just like a whole crew. And by the end, the whole crew, they were so into the practice. I mean, Bill Moyers was meditating. I mean, it's just like, oh, what do you know? Okay. It's these spots that are tough. Okay.
I tried to do it after I was doing my stretches for rehab, thinking that that's when I needed to relax. And all I felt was a real heightened awareness of all the pain. I felt really angry at all the pain and all the trouble that it's caused.
So there's a lot of anger there.
Yeah.
Do Do you feel at all friendly towards your body?
I feel like I've always used my mind to overcome it.
Uh-huh.
And now I can't do that anymore.
Well, this is an experiment in learning how to do the whole thing differently. And the first thing is that if pain is there, we're not going to sort of wall it off and deny that it's present, okay? It's going to be here, and we have to, in some way, learn how to work around the corners of it, work with it, and still not have it erode the quality of our life.
He takes the people we can't help. Those are the ones who get to Jon.
Can you bend your knees? Can they go flat? That's right. Now let's see. Okay, beautiful. You got it. Take your hand away then. You don't need the hand in there. Just back and forth. By the third week, I like to get them down on the floor practicing yoga, especially the people who feel their bodies don't work very well anymore, because often what comes up for them is quite painful. It's fine, don't worry about it. And you feel the pain. And you just see, let me see if I can ride the waves of this sensation. And you watch the sensations come and go, and very often they will change. Right there. Noticing that you can uncouple the sensations from your thoughts about them. And like, this is killing me, it's going to last forever, there's nothing I'll be able to do about it. And you learn to free yourself from those thoughts and realize those are just thoughts. And then it turns out there's inner stillness and peace right within some of the most difficult life situations.
Can you ride on the waves of it? You know what I mean? Float with it. See if you can stay with the breath and just let the pain do whatever it does. You stay on top of it, but floating on the breath.
Two people this week asked my wife, "Hey, what's with Danny?"
Your friends are starting to ask your wife?
Yeah, well, they didn't say it to me. Well, no, it wasn't my friend. It was my mother-in-law.
Oh.
Boy, he's awful nice and talkative all of a sudden now. And I started laughing. I thought it was pretty good. I didn't notice that. I said, "Oh, there's nothing with me."
Okay, we can have the lights back up. The way this clip came about, the program's 45 minutes, but this is kind of parenthetical and anecdotal, but a scientist in Freiburg, Germany, made this clip out of that 45 minutes, this is about 3 minutes long, to take to a conference in Berlin, because there was kind of this notion afoot among certain people that MBSR was like all about mindfulness, but it had nothing to do with compassion. So he took these clips and just put it together into that 3-minute thing and brought it to that thing. Because, you know, there's this kind of phenomenon that people then want to self-identify around professional interests. So we take, like, compassion is another deep aspect of Buddhist meditation. But people who want to separate compassion from mindfulness, it's like the word for mind and heart in all Asian languages is the same word. So when you hear in English the word mindfulness, if you're not hearing the word heartfulness, you're not understanding it at all. And there's no separation. They often speak of compassion as, you know, and mindfulness as two wings of the bird. So, but there is a kind of tendency to sort of differentiate one from another. Sometimes that can be incredibly valuable. There are real compassion meditations and so forth. But if MBSR is not, if compassion is not embodied by the MBSR teacher, it ain't MBSR. And if it's contrived compassion, then it ain't compassion. So we have to watch out, because like it's very easy to put on sort of like a happy smiley face, or sort of get caught up in pretending that you care. And of course everybody knows you don't, because you can't. People are not stupid, they can feel it. Pretense of compassion, not compassion. So it all invites embodiment, and that's its own puzzle or koan or challenge. Is like, how do you embody what you already are, because you're already compassionate? How many people are mothers in this room? The Dalai Lama is always bringing up this example, like instinctive, inborn compassion for these creatures that grew out of your bodies. I mean, you talk about miracles. The cognitive, conceptual mind will never get that one. There are all sorts of miracles around our humanity that we just kind of dispense with or ignore at our peril. So I want to say that from the get-go, from the first moment, MBSR has always been grounded in a fundamentally ethical intention and stance. And that is the Hippocratic Oath. It was under the umbrella of medicine. And that is, first, do no harm. How would you even know if you're doing harm? How many of you have been harmed by a doctor in one way or another? Anybody? Or even just disregard is a harm. So, of course, we know that. So how would you even know if you're causing harm unless you're there, unless you're awake, unless you're mindful? So it's like axiomatic that it should be part of the training of medical students, and of course it has been now in many, many medical schools for a very long time. But the Hippocratic Oath, as I said, it could be betrayed, and it has been betrayed many, many times in medicine for horrible purposes. And the Bodhisattva vow in the Buddhist tradition is like, that again, it's kind of an ethical stance, and mindfulness is rooted and grounded in what's called sila in the Pali language, which is the original language in which the Buddhist texts were written down. And it really does have to do with non-harming. And the awareness that would allow you to experience the impulse to harm or to differentiate and say, I need this, you're a danger to that. And then, you've already harmed yourself in doing that, but it takes a certain maturity to see that. So I'm going to just kind of very quickly read you a statement that I read in the New York Times way back before I started MBSR, sitting in a cafe around the Harvard Medical School where I was working. And I read this on the some anniversary of Einstein's death in the New York Times. And when I read it, I was in the cafe, I fell off my chair. I mean, literally fell off my chair. A rabbi had written to Einstein, the context of this is a rabbi had written to Albert Einstein. I don't know how many of you are not old enough to have been alive when Albert, but I remember it, because he was like Muhammad. Maybe you don't even know who Muhammad Ali is anymore, but he was like more famous than Muhammad Ali or Michael Jordan rolled up together, because he was like obviously known as the smartest man in the world, and they'd already proved enough of the general theory of relativity and the special relativity, so they're like, and there was some quib that only 3 people understood relativity, and one of them Einstein, and then Sir Arthur Eddington, and he couldn't remember who the third one was. But of course there was like lots of physicists, but this is hard stuff. But now, like, we live in that kind of post-Einsteinian world. But a rabbi had written, people from all around the world would write to the smartest man in the world with their personal problems. And because, I mean, why miss the chance to ask the one question you care about most of the smartest man in the world. And the most amazing piece of this is that he'd write back. This was before the age of the internet. And so this rabbi had written saying that he had sought in vain to comfort his 19-year-old daughter over the death of her 16-year-old sister, a sinless, beautiful being. And so here's a rabbi who's a spiritual person, spiritual teacher, asking advice from like the greatest scientist that ever lived. And Einstein writes back, and this is what he wrote. And it's like, this is what threw me off my chair. It was like gravitation, A human being is a part of the whole, called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He or she, I'll just do the personal pronouns the way he did it. Of course, he said it in German, experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. That's separation. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires, I, me, and mine, and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion. This is the guy who single-handedly unified our understanding of matter and energy and space and time, and he's talking about compassion. To embrace all living creatures and the whole nature in its beauty. Nobody is able to achieve this completely, but the striving for such attainment is in itself a part of the liberation. Now he's using the word liberation, and a foundation for inner security. So by that time, at some point I picked myself up off the floor, but it was just a level of insight and compassion to articulate it in the face of that kind of suffering. I mean, the death of a child and how you explain it. What would you respond? I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of psychotherapists in the room, but, faced with that question from the rabbi, what would you respond? Something. Okay. I want to just point out a manuscript that hasn't even been published yet that came to me, sent by Helen Wang, who was a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin with Richie Davidson. And she's just a completely amazing being. And some other people from the University of Wisconsin and other neuroscientists and various kinds of clinicians and so forth. This is a paper, it hasn't been published yet, but it's called Focus on the Breath. Brain decoding reveals internal states of attention during meditation. They are beginning to now use artificial intelligence paradigms to actually look deeply, and I know this is happening here at Brown in Judd Brewer's lab as well, to look deeply into the actual moment-to-moment experiences of what are unfolding as when somebody meditates. Okay? And there's a lot of, it's a whole universe inside just one person doing this. So it's not like, hey, we're all doing the same thing. No, none of us are doing the same thing except attending. Or being completely distracted and not attending. And then recognizing, oh my God, I've been out of body experience, out to lunch experience, and I can come back. Because that recognition, you're already back. And I'll just read you a paragraph from it because there's something that this paragraph captures about the science that is what I was trying to point to when I talk about the exponential rise in the science and how good some of it is. And these people all meditate, by the way. Meditation practices or mental exercises that train qualities of attention are increasingly used to improve health and well-being in clinical populations as well as the general public. Meditation and mindfulness-based interventions may cultivate sustained attention, each one of these as documentation. Compassion and pro-social behavior, creativity, improved brain structure and function, less implicit bias, reduced stress, and decreased symptoms in clinical populations with pain, depression, anxiety, and cancer. Based on these promising results, meditation practices are being implemented in a variety of fields such as medicine, psychology, education, business, law, and politics. You'd never know it by looking at the Brexit stuff that's going on in there. But like hundreds of parliamentarians in the House of Commons and the House of Lords have been through an 8-week program modeled on MBSR. But the way they're going at Brexit is like seriously unbelievable. And that's not to say anything about the United States. Don't get me started. Collectively, meditation practices may strengthen interoception. That's awareness of internal body sensations, and that's through those maps in the brain. Okay, no maps, no brain, no neurons, no sensation in the hand. Okay, so it's not like, oh yeah, there's my hand. I mean, there's no you and there's no hand. There's just these phenomena that are arising through, and I didn't say it, but you know, what's sitting right underneath the vault of your cranium is the most complex organization of matter in the known universe. So when you get depressed, just remember that, like, hey, you know, 86 billion neurons, another equal amount of, at least of glial cells, and no one knows what they're doing in there at all, but they can't be an accident. And then if you start to think of the synaptic connections, thousands of trillions of synaptic connections in these neural nets that are constantly changing in certain areas on the basis of moment-by-moment experience. And as Judd Brewer and his colleagues and other people have shown, the practice of mindfulness actually drives this neuroplasticity function to actually create what's called greater functional connectivity between regions of the brain when you start to anthropomorphize them, you say talk to each other or don't talk to each other. Like impulse control in children, like it would be nice if somebody talked to the prefrontal cortex, but it has to develop first. And or talks to the amygdala and sort of the limbic system. So anyway, where was I? Collectively, meditation practices may strengthen interoception, cognitive processes, including sustained attention, cognitive monitoring, and meta-awareness. That means awareness of awareness. Okay, so sapiens. And emotion regulation, in other words, less judgment and more equanimity with interior states, internal experiences. With practice, that's exercising the muscle. And without exercising the muscle, we can blah, blah, blah about mindfulness till the cows come home, means zero. With practice, these skills may lead to better monitoring and regulation of physical, emotional, and social processes, contributing to improved health decision-making and behaviors. However, the mechanisms through which meditation improves health and well-being are poorly specified, very poorly specified, I would say, in part because there is no current precise way to assess the quality of meditation practice. And then this paper is like 50 pages long, and then it has like a 20-page appendix with lots of brain scans, which I'm not showing you. So I'm just saying, this is only one paper. There are hundreds of these papers coming out by young researchers who are on fire about this, but they're as much tapping into this laboratory as they are tapping into the scanner. I also want to say that mindfulness has profound implications for social justice. Okay? First of all, if we're talking about public health, the biggest factor in public health, or the lack thereof, is poverty. Lack of resources. external resources, exterior resource, to say nothing of interior resources, which is what we're cultivating when we're cultivating mindfulness. We're cultivating a gold mine of interior resources that we have to learn how to mine or tap into in order to have them emerge. But, you know, if you're starving, or if you're living in a neighborhood where you've experienced 5 episodes of violence on your way to school, you know, a little meditation is like, forget about it. We need to transform the way the planet operates, the way our society operates, where every single human being is actually, in a democracy like ours, given the opportunity to live their life fully, with minimal suffering and maximal opportunity to be healthy, to be well, to enjoy the public health. Okay, or is public health just for some people? Okay, and it's like, oh, yeah, well, just wait a couple of 100 years and it'll work itself out. No, we don't have a couple of 100 years to have it work itself out. The body politic is rending in certain ways, and it's also re-emerging in ways that are actually quite marvelous. All you need to do is watch television, and you'll see. But I want to point out that this is not something that I came to recently. In the 60s, as I said, I mean, the 60s were also a period of tremendous social turmoil and so forth. And so there was a lot of stuff going on at MIT in the 60s. We shut it down. We declared a strike. We investigated and dialogued around the uses of science for developing guided missile systems to drop bombs down. I mean, MIT brought you all the laser-guided weapons and smart bombs, so to speak, and also the MIRV intercontinental ballistic missiles. I knew the people who built them and was in conversation with them. We shut the whole place down and talked about that. So anyway, so we got to know a bunch of Black Panthers during that time. And it was like really cool for the Black Panthers to come on the MIT campus. And they invited a French philosopher named Jean Genet to come and speak. And it so happened that I speak enough French to have been the only person possible to translate for the guy. So that's from the MIT newspaper at the time. And it was the time of like Angela Davis being imprisoned and all sorts of turmoil around the Black Panthers and just summary murders on the part of police in Chicago and other places of Black people. Like, so what's changed, okay? What's different? And then in 2015, I had the pleasure of being on stage with her in front of like 1,400 people in Oakland, almost none of whom were white, talking about what use is mindfulness in an unjust world, which is exactly the kind of conversation we have to be having to stretch our own envelope and to stretch our own sort of ways in which, for instance, we don't actually see the things that we don't see. We need each other to mirror back to us what we don't see. Like, it took me a very long time to realize, for instance, that my skin color is a privilege. I mean, I'm talking about to realize it. To realize it took me like 73 and a half years. To realize that the family I was born into gave me a certain kind of access. That the schools I went to, that there was like no end to it. And I knew that, of course, not everybody had those opportunities, but I didn't know it in a kind of more than cognitive way. In a way that actually recognizes how important it is to recognize those kinds of, domains, and then not to necessarily apologize because your skin happens to be white, but to actually recognize suffering and the roots of suffering, the root causes of suffering, and how many of those come out of the hearts and minds of human beings that have actually used justice, used the law, used different kinds of institutional frameworks to prevent other people from enjoying on an equal playing field the possibilities of this country, okay? And there's like a whole history of that. Reconstruction after the Civil War, and then all of a sudden, whammo, they figured out another way to basically have slavery continue right up to the civil rights movement. Only, they put people in jail because of all these state laws that made it impossible to vote, or impossible to own land, or impossible to this, or impossible to that. It was all legal as hell. And if you lived where I lived, that's what the 60s were about. So I just want to say that it's hard to separate one thing from another, whether it's social issues, whether it's political issues. It's all public health. And to deny certain aspects of it and do good in other ways, it's like the country was founded on genocide. We've never eaten that one. The country is founded on slavery, which means enormous amounts of wealth were actually created from human slaves who were stolen from their own continent in a gigantic, enterprise with very enterprising people who had the whole thing down, selling people. And a huge amount of wealth. So when there's talk about reparations, it's like, why shouldn't there be? At least we have to eat that. We have to metabolize it. We have to digest it in a way that it's not like white guilt or apology or whatever, but I'm trying to point to something that's intrinsic to the public health, if we're ever going to get to public health in a way that really is up to the task. And one way to loop back to the quote from one of the quotes from the Surgeon General's report is start early. Mindfulness in school is becoming a giant movement, but it's not guaranteed because people misunderstand mindfulness and they think we're trying to turn their kids into Buddhists. And then rightfully, there's no supposed to be religion in the schools, and they hire these incredible right-wing law firms that have read more stuff that I've written than I can even remember that I wrote, and misunderstood every single thing that is in it. So sooner or later, this is going to go to the Supreme Court. But this is work that Erica Sabinga and people are doing in Baltimore with inner city Baltimore schools. You know what's going on in Baltimore nowadays. They've been doing this work for years. It's phenomenal. And also other people, what I call the Baltimore boys, Ali Smith and Atman Smith and Andy Gonzalez, have this whole thing that they're doing with kids in the Baltimore public schools in the neighborhood where they grew up. And it is phenomenal. It's been featured on various news programs, television, and so forth. That's public health. When you see these 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds and them meditating and doing yoga, it's phenomenal. And then I just want to show you in closing, before we go into dialogue, in 1992, I learned that a woman had gone through, there was only one other stress reduction MBSR program in the entire country. And it was in the Latter-day Saints Hospital in Salt Lake City, Utah. Mormon hospital. And there was a woman there named Peg Hunter, and she was teaching MBSR. She got it out of full catastrophe living. She just and she was a meditator. She figured it out. She did it. And in her class was an elementary school teacher named Cherry Hamrick. And Cherry Hamrick was so touched by what she learned and practiced in MBSR, she decided, I'm going to bring this into my 4th and 5th grade classroom at the Welby Elementary School in South Jordan, Utah. Now, had she asked me, I would have said, don't do it. You're going to get lynched. You'll get strung up. This is someone's going to figure out this is Buddhist meditation, and they're not going to understand that it's universal and it's not Buddhist. Don't do it. But like any good student, she didn't ask or she didn't listen. She just went ahead with what she thought was the right thing to do, and it was phenomenal. And so I'll just show you some pictures of it. And one of the things that I want to say is that Dave Vago from Vanderbilt University and a fellow named Nakamura at University of Utah are doing a 15-year follow-up on these kids who are now, you'll see this is what the kids looked like in the 4th and 5th grade. Now they're adults. They have children. They have jobs and stuff like that. And so they're going back and asking, like, how did this affect your life compared to kids who also went to that school who were in other people's classes? And mindfulness eventually spread throughout the school, and even the Mormon bishop, who was the 6th grade teacher, he was teaching mindfulness. So it is possible that these barriers can dissolve if you understand that it's not an ism, it's not a catechism, it's not a belief system. It's a way of paying attention and embodied awareness. So the kids are meditating here, and whoops, how did I do that? I will just show you the rest of it this way, because I don't know how to get back to it. Or maybe you can quickly run up here and do it for me. Thank you. Great. So here, every day, one of the kids guides a meditation. I went on a Saturday one day. I could only fly in on a Saturday, and I sat next to a mother of a child who was told to me was the most hated kid in the school. He was like bouncing off the walls. He had ADHD big time. He led the meditation that day, and he sat for 15 minutes and with his mother, just in disbelief and also smiling. And was no longer the most hated kid in the school. So here they are doing body scans, lying down meditations, sitting meditation in the classroom, mindful hatha yoga, the tree. And she was like a very clever teacher. She was a genius of a teacher. So she integrated mindfulness into every aspect of the curriculum. You can't see in this picture, but she also had 2 parakeets flying around the room and landing in the trees. And here they are eating, we're famous for like giving people 2 raisins at the beginning of the MBSR course and then taking 15 or 20 minutes to eat them one at a time. So here, these kids are eating 1/8 of a chocolate bar. And then they're doing mindful walking in the schoolyard. This is now spread around the country and in many other countries too. Why? Because the teachers are pulling their hair out because they can't teach. Because the kids are not coming to school ready to learn. So you have to teach them to tune their instrument before they can play it, their instrument of learning. And if we hope for future generations to actually move the bell curve or to actually live our way into the full dimensionality of the species name we gave ourselves, gotta start with the kids. But it's not an indoctrination into a belief system. It's a kind of introduction and an adventuring into what it means to be fully human. And how different we all are, so that it's not like, we're all the same. We all have like different experiences, but we can put the welcome mat out for the differences. And then just to say, it's also spread throughout medicine and medical schools and stuff like that. But in the end, mindfulness is good medicine. And I think mindfulness is actually kind of foundational for what we're facing in terms of public health. And so I think I'll end, before I go to that slide, with one other thing, and that is, how many of you have heard of Noah Yuval Harari? Okay, wrote a book called Sapiens. It was a huge bestseller. He's an Israeli historian. Then he wrote a book, and so that's about the past, as he says. Then he wrote a book called Homo Deus, which is about the future. And then he wrote a book called 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. Anybody read it? It's phenomenal. So in that book, the 21st lesson is mindfulness. By the time you read those 3 books, you're going to be rather depressed. Because what he says about AI and the algorithms and so forth, and what I was pointing to about the sort of the age of surveillance capitalism, is no joke. That we're not, and Elizabeth Warren is talking about this now, that we're just like, let it all happen because there's no understanding of it, like, sort of whatever Facebook was doing, like, fine, all of a sudden, like, we can't even control our own elections. Nobody understands this stuff except the people who have written the algorithms. Maybe they don't even understand it. So the question is, how do we corral this genie that's already out of the bottle where, and it's not, I'm not talking about Ludditism. I'm not talking about going back to the good old days, because the good old days, they sucked. They weren't the good old days. There are no good old days. It's either here, now, as it is. And that's insanely beautiful, and also there's enormous amount of pain. How do we hold that with a kind of integrity in the heart, non-duality, wisdom, compassion, equanimity? Those are dimensions of our humanity that we can learn to cultivate and help each other with. We can teach each other. We need each other. It's a we engagement, not a me for my self-improvement. There's no improving this on the self, because actually there is no such thing as self. It's a narrative, it's a story, and Yuval Harari is really very brilliant about saying how the only way they could build the pyramids was to have a story about Pharaoh and his power, and a story about how millions of people can get together and build something that's who knew that they could do something like that? They don't exactly have John Deere heavy equipment and stuff like that, but they had people. So we've always been into stories. I would like to say our story, the problem with it is it's not big enough. So in the last chapter of 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, he discloses that since a friend drove him nuts about it, he finally went on a meditation retreat maybe 15 or 20 years ago, fairly intensive, month-long Vipassana retreat, where, no connectivity, no cell phones, no nothing for a month, and that he's been doing that now for the past 15 or 20 years, every year, 1 or 2 months. And he says, I know this may not be for everybody, but then he says, but I haven't found anything that even has a glimmer of chance of being up to the task of dealing with the other challenges of the 21 lessons of the 21st century. This is not optional. This is an absolute requirement for us to, as the, whoever the ad agency was that, did it for the army, sort of be all you can be. I would reframe it as be all you already are. Be all we already are. And so Bill Gates reviewed the book on the front page of the New York Times book review on a Sunday book review. And he said, when all is said and done, what's Harari's message after he talks about terrorism and self-driving cars and this and that and everything else, and biotech and infotech? This is the main message. It's biotech and infotech are just driving things to the point where, pretty soon we're going to be upgrading ourselves. Of course, this is an upgrade. And who over 50 wouldn't appreciate a memory upgrade, if it was possible? What was I just saying? But before these kinds of forces move in, you can see how much devastation it can have if it's not done mindfully. So we need mindfulness now more than ever to control the algorithms in a certain way, or believe me, the algorithms will start controlling us. That's his message. And so he said we only have like a 10-year window in his regard. This guy's unbelievably smart. He says we only have a 10-year window in which to do this. And Bill Gates is pointing out that that's his message. And Bill Gates is saying, and I agree with it because I've been through a mindfulness course myself, and I can testify that it's the real deal. It's Bill Gates, who revolutionized our lives more than anybody else except maybe Steve Jobs. Not necessarily in ways that we're happy about. Like, I was once thinking of writing a book, how Bill Gates and Steve Jobs ruined my life, Because most of work is now this, it's like. Anyway, so mindfulness is good medicine. I'd like to leave you with a quote from the founder, the father is often spoken of of American psychology, William James, who said, I have no doubt whatever that most people live, whether physically, intellectually, or morally, in a very restricted circle of their potential being. They make use of a very small portion of their possible consciousness, much like a man who, out of his whole bodily organism should get into a habit of using and moving only his little finger. We all have reservoirs of life to draw upon, of which we do not dream. So maybe we should start dreaming. Thank you, folks.
Hi, everyone. My name's Eric Lokes. I'm director of the Mindfulness Center at Brown, and what we're doing with the Mindfulness Center right now is some major strategic planning that is involving dozens and dozens of stakeholders right across the world. And so one of the things that we've been working with is this idea of setting big goals, along with embodying the mindfulness qualities of non-striving, to not grasp for those goals. And we were watching a clip of Jon sharing just how important it is if we can be right here in this moment, seeing what is needed by society right now, and perhaps how mindfulness can offer that, what arises. And so what is arising in us in the Mindfulness Center right now? And so some of the things that we're really starting to be moving towards is taking the essence of MBSR, offering MBSR and meeting people where they're at, whether it's meeting them through online programs, through offering it in Spanish, and then also offering it for children and educators and in healthcare settings and in corporate settings. We've hired some of the best mindfulness educators in the country in the last year, and we've also hired some of the top scientists. And so the magic is really happening between those two, so that the scientists have remarkable mindfulness educators to be able to really guide the wisdom of the mindfulness interventions that they're trying out. And then the educators have remarkable scientists to be able to set the foundation of evidence-based mindfulness programs to be developed. And then one last thing that we're doing is creating this global mindfulness collaborative that is providing the infrastructure for evidence-based mindfulness programs to be delivered in high quality right around the world. And so we've partnered with some of the top MBSR teacher trainers in France and Italy and Argentina and Mexico, South Africa, really all around the world, so that we can create that infrastructure to allow high quality evidence-based mindfulness interventions to be delivered. So much of this started because of Jon. And if we look at the transmission of wisdom through all the generations of humanity, we're hoping that the Mindfulness Center is continuing to do that with the help of Jon. So just really want to thank you for being here and offering your wisdom to us. I want to respect everyone's time as well, so if you need to go, you definitely should feel free to do that, but we also might have maybe 5 minutes or so for questions and dialogue too, so we'll just open it up for that. And one final reminder is that tomorrow is Public Health Research Day, and we'll be meeting here at 1:30, so if you want to really see the science that's happening at the School of Public Health, it'll be happening in this room on display tomorrow as well, and you're very welcome to be here. So thank you, and we'll turn it over to Jon. So thanks. And
I just want to echo what Eric's just said, that there's been a confluence here at Brown in the past year to add to what's already been going on for many, many decades here at Brown. And I think the mindfulness community and the Mindfulness Center at Brown has an enormous opportunity here to really do things in a phenomenal way. The staff, the teaching staff, the faculty, the researchers, everybody is on board in a way that is very hard to actually happen within any kind of institutional framework. And I am just really in awe of it and very optimistic that this community is going to play a huge role in the future in moving that bell curve exactly as we were talking about, in directions that really make a lot of sense, including recognizing the community here in Providence that may need these kinds of, or want to have in some kind of engagement with these kinds of adventures, and to really see that that's not like a one-way street where the benefit all goes in one direction, but the benefits are profound in all directions. And to just say that, Hal Roth's teacher and my Zen teacher, it all started here in Providence at the Providence Zen Center on Hope Street. And I used to drive down from Cambridge. Sometimes every morning before going to work, I drive from Cambridge down here, sit the morning sitting, and then drive back and go to work. So Providence itself is like a major nexus of this, and has been as long as I can remember. So let's have a few responses to anything that either got said or didn't get said, or that pushed your buttons, or that you want to amplify. We won't take too much time, and I apologize for running over. I just, in some sense, got carried away by your attention. I'll put the blame on you. and I moved into the timeless in a kind of irresponsible way. So please.
Yeah. Hi, I'm a graduate student in
You
public...
can tilt it down so that it's at your level.
Yeah, I'm a graduate student in public health, and I am a Vipassana meditator. I became interested in mindfulness when I was working in refugee camps before I started this MPH program. And I know you did touch on social justice, and my question is, you had elements of like personal responsibility in your presentation, how the individual should take responsibility, when the health system is letting them down and they're falling through the cracks. But out of like the mindfulness literature that there's very few studies that have been done amongst like low-income populations and ethnic minorities. It seems like there's structural barriers and social justice elements that kind of hold back like mindfulness from certain populations, and there's a huge gap like from getting people that don't have their basic needs met to like a collective society where everyone's getting their public health needs equally met. So I'm wondering how you see mindfulness filling that gap. Like, how do we get from where we are now to a society where public health is equal and like Native Americans aren't have the highest like prevalence of diabetes? Like, how do we include those populations?
Thank you for the question. And actually, we've been having these very conversations with the dean, with Bess Marcus and with Eric, and the intention, as I understand it, is to really move out in that direction into the community, but not like in a kind of imperialistic kind of occupying territory, but actually invitational to sort of how this can develop. I will say that back in the early 90s, I started a stress reduction clinic in the inner city in Worcester, which ran for like 9 years. And there's a paper that finally came out about that kind of thing. But there's the barriers really are, in some sense, you're right, there are all sorts of social and economic barriers, but the biggest barriers in our own minds. And that when we reach out to communities and we find domains of common ground and common languaging, rather than imposing in a kind of imperialist kind of way, some kind of framework that we think will be good for you, the other, then that's how community really melds, and where we can dissolve some of those structural barriers, so structural racism, implicit bias, all of those kinds of things. It's workable if we're willing to do the work. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much.
You can tilt it back up to your height. Yeah. Okay.
So this is a broad question, but I'm a first-year undergrad at Brown, and I'm thinking about studying environmental studies. But I'm also really interested in figuring out ways to involve contemplative practices, mindfulness, in environmental studies, and I have really very few concrete ideas of how to do that. But I'm just wondering, because you talk so much about social justice and how mindfulness can be...
Hold it up closer.
Sorry. How mindfulness can be a powerful tool in social problems, social justice, how we can involve mindfulness and contemplative practice in addressing the ecological crisis that's happening in our planet.
A beautiful question. And I'm just lingering with that. And what comes to mind, and I don't mean to blow you off with this response, but to actually ignite some kind of afterburner to your passion any way you can. See, that's kind of what the karmic assignment is, if it is indeed your karmic assignment, is to find imaginative possibilities that everybody is going to say are impossible, and then make them happen. So I would prefer that answer to giving you A, B, and C bullet points about what you can do, because you're a unique human being, and you're a freshman here. So like you've got, the resources of the university, your entire life in front of you. Trust what you love, and don't let anybody tell you that it's bullshit. And then you'll learn from your experience, and failure is not a problem. I mean, failure is just one more way to understand what might not work at the present moment, and you just try something else. And it's like, I often use this analogy, like, think of it as water, like snow melt, finding its way down a mountain. It will find its way, and it is not stopped by obstacles. It will simply go around them. So the more you can use your university experience and your community experience and your family experience and your whatever you love experience, or whoever you think you are, and the narratives you tell yourself being the age that you are, that's all like part of the adventure. And there's no one right way to do it. There are an infinite number of wrong ways. But there's no one right way. So if you really listen carefully, your interior wisdom is like aging is like not necessarily like wisdom comes with aging. You just get fucking older. If you'll pardon my putting it that way. But the most important thing is to trust your love. What do you care about so deeply? It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. You trust that, and it will change over time, and you'll learn from everybody else. And if you don't get too caught up in your own ego or your own story, then you may really wind up making a contribution that's yours uniquely to make. And I'm not now talking to you, I'm talking to every single person in the room. Because I think that that's the way the world really transforms and heals. And everything else is in some sense a power grab or more about me. Does that make any sense to you? Go for it. Thank you.
Hi. I've worked part-time.
This will be the last question. I think we should have it be the last, just because I ran over so long.
I do work part-time.
Point it up a little closer to your mouth. Yeah.
Is that better?
Much better.
I work part-time, working with families that have elderly family members or people with chronic illnesses. And I've had experiences working with families, patients, and the medical community, usually when they're interfacing with...
I'm not hearing you well.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
So I've had experiences as a consultant working with people with chronic illnesses, people who are terminally ill, and their families, and the traditional medical community, hospitals, doctors, social workers.
Okay.
And I've had a few experiences noticing that the way medicine is constructed today, with insurance being such a big voice in terms of how traditional medicine is handled, and also how the compartmentalization of specialties has been constructed, that dealing with the whole person gets harder and harder, and the interface between the medical community and different members of the medical community gets difficult because they're on a certain track and families are on a different track, and the patient is sort of divided up by what's going on.
Yeah.
And because of your experience, and I noticed in your presentation, you talked about helping people who were not being helped by traditional medical practice. So I wanted to ask you, how do you see this practice affecting the infrastructure of traditional medicine? Do you think that there's any way for this to be integrated and to influence it organizationally, or to help people
I hope so.
on a larger scale?
I hope so. I see the possibility. I would say that part of it is that the physicians, if we're talking about medicine, the physicians and the nurses have to reclaim sovereignty over their own domain and not have it be a business. Because the real business is the business of healing and recognizing the other and not being afraid of suffering and not algorithmizing it. And that's just one way in which those algorithms are going to really destroy what's best in our institutions. Medicine has, serious problems and really needs to be completely restructured in certain ways. And how that's going to unfold, I mean, I don't think anybody is like sitting in the place where they know. But the more we can be the cells of the body politic, the more we actually already can influence how things are going to unfold. And then, of course, since there are a lot of young people in the room, these things don't happen overnight. And maybe that's your karma or karmic assignment, is to, contribute in profound ways to making medicine work. Making work.
Thank you very much.
And I want to thank you all for your attention, and thank Bess Marcus and